Virginia Tech had high expectations in 2024. A lot of people had them as a dark horse contender in the ACC, maybe even possibly getting into that college football playoff conversation. And it really didn't work out that way, of course, starting with that loss to Vanderbilt. And the season just really did not go great for Virginia Tech. So we look ahead to 2025. We're going to preview the schedule, give you an early projected record for this team. And we will start by looking at that schedule. So here it is. They'll open up August 31st, week 1, against South Carolina, and that game will be in Atlanta. A big non-conference game here. Shane Beamer taking on his dad's old school. That should be really interesting. South Carolina probably going to be tough for Virginia Tech to beat, but we'll see how that plays out. They play two SEC teams in a row. So week 2 they play Vanderbilt September 6th. We all know what happened last year. This time it's at home. I think Virginia Tech will be a little bit more focused this time. I think maybe they overlooked Vanderbilt in that game last year. Vandy turned out to be a lot better than we thought. Then you got Old Dominion September 13th and Wofford on September 20th. So 3 or 4, I should say, non-conference games to kick off the season. And then they get right into ACC play, and they'll play ACC games the rest of the way, 8 in a row. So NC State is the first one, September 27th. That game will be on the road. And then they'll be home for Wake Forest on October the 4th. And then it's back on the road for Virginia Tech, October 11th. And then they get their first bye week. They only play 2 games before another bye week. They'll have Cal on a weeknight, Friday night, October 24th at home, and then Louisville at home November 1st. And again, they get that second bye week. We've seen some odd things with these bye weeks. We've seen some teams where they just have one game in between bye weeks, or they have both their bye weeks in the first half or the last half. The bye weeks were not all created equally. Let's just put it that way. And that's just, that's what you're going to have when you have your conference setting your conference schedule, but then you go schedule your non-conference schedule. It's going to happen because, those two things are kind of separate. So, again, bye week there, number 2. Then they go on the road to play Florida State November 15th. Then it's home for Miami on the 22nd and on the road at Virginia November 27th. So when you look at the schedule overall, especially in the ACC, it's really not that bad. They don't have to play Clemson. They don't have to play SMU. The 2 teams were in the ACC Championship last year. Now they do have to play some of the tougher teams. They play Miami. They play Louisville. So, I wouldn't say it's a super easy schedule. But when you look at their opponents and their opponents' win percentages from last year, this is what you get. Virginia Tech actually has the easiest ACC schedule. 42% win percentage there. Their opponents last year, they went 27-37. Now, a big part of that is Florida State. We know how bad they were. If they are a lot better this year, then that makes this schedule maybe not quite as easy. If Florida State turns out to be terrible again, then yeah, Virginia Tech's going to have one of the easiest conference schedules in the ACC. So, again, very interesting there. Let's get to the projection now, and this is the schedule. Actually, before we get to this year's projection, let's look back at the last 4 years. So these were our projections from the last 4 seasons. In 2021, projected to go 7-5. They went 6-6. Big disappointment in 22. Projected to go 7-5. They went 3-8. Remember, they didn't play that last game against Virginia. In 2023, 5-7. They went 6-6. Last year, projection was 6-6. Finally got it right, and they went 6-6. So really, if you look at the last 4 years, 3 out of 4 years they went 6-6. So that's kind of been the normal thing there for Virginia Tech. Can they improve on that this year? We'll see. So we get to the projection. This is the scale that we use. And again, this is all based off of our tier rankings. Virginia Tech is in tier number 4. That's where they wind up going into 2025, which means if they play a tier 5 team, that game is in the purple, 61-70%. But if they play that game on the road, then it drops into the 40-60% range. So that's the way the projections work. And we will start with the easier wins. And I think you've got one pretty much guaranteed win. That's Wofford. I mean, they should roll in this one, FCS team. And then you've got a couple of games in the blue, Old Dominion and Wake Forest. Now, Old Dominion, they're they're a respectable group of 5 teams, so I don't think you can take that game too lightly. But Virginia Tech should win that game. And then you've got Wake Forest at home. They're a couple of tiers above the Demon Deacons, so you feel pretty good about that one as well. So that's 3 wins you can almost guarantee for Virginia Tech. I wouldn't say guarantee, but you feel really good about those 3 games. But that's really it. Again, when you've got South Carolina and Vanderbilt in the non-conference, you're not going to have a ton of like really easy games. So let's go to the next ones. Next, we're going to have these games, actually just one game in the purple, and that's Cal. And I think Virginia Tech should be favored by, a touchdown or so in this one, which means 4 games where Virginia Tech will be favored, and I think pretty clear favorites in these 4 games. That means the rest of the games, they're either going to be a clear underdog, or those games are going to be closer to a toss-up. And again, that's what you get with the rest of the schedule. We'll go to the opposite side of the game that they probably have the least likely chance to win. That's South Carolina. That game, we've got that one in the orange. South Carolina, a couple of tiers above Virginia Tech. Game is in Atlanta. You would think that that's going to favor South Carolina as well. So that game is in the orange. And then we go to the games in the yellow. Georgia Tech and Miami. Georgia Tech 1 tier above Virginia Tech. Miami 2 tiers above Virginia Tech. But Georgia Tech's on the road, Miami's at home. So that's the difference there. That's why you see the same percentage for teams that are in 2 different tiers. So Georgia Tech and Miami. And then we go to, the rest of these games, they're all in that 50-50 category. So a lot of games that could go either way for Virginia Tech. You've got Vanderbilt, they're in the same tier. NC State, 1 tier below, but that one's on the road. Louisville, 1 tier above, but that game's at home. Florida State, 1 tier below, that game's on the road. And then Virginia is in the same tier as Virginia Tech in that number 4 tier. So that's, again, a lot of games there that could go either way. When you look at the schedule, and let's just say they win the games that they're going to be favored in, and they lose the games that they're going to be underdogs. That means you would have 4 wins, and you would have 3 losses. So a 4-3 record, and then you get to these other games, these other 5 games, that's really going to determine the season. If they're able to win all these games, it's a really good year. They're up there at 9-3 actually. So that would be a really good season. Or even let's say they lose to Louisville, but they beat Georgia Tech or they beat Miami, something like that. There is a path for 9-3, I think, for Virginia Tech. But on the flip side, let's say they lose all of these 50-50 games. Let's say they lose all of them. Then you're sitting there at 4-8, and it's a huge disappointment. So, which way will it go when we do our projection? Again, it's going to average out, and that's where we get the projection. So the projection for Virginia Tech in 2025 is 7-5. So that is the projection for this team. Again, if you're 4-3 and you split the rest of the games, that's going to give you 6.5 wins. That rounds up to 7-5. That's not exactly how the math came out, but again, a lot of games that could go either way, and it's going to be an interesting season for Virginia Tech with a new head coach. If they win a lot of those games, and I think they'll have a lot of close games, if they win those, they're going to have potentially a really good year. But it could easily go the other way. Like I said, it could be a 4-8, 5-7 type season. Maybe 6-6 would be like. Again, there's no human element here. There's no predictions. This is all based off of math. But if I'm looking at this just as from the human element, I'd probably say 6-6, a little bit more likely than 7-5. Just looking at the odds of these games here. So the over/under, I'd probably put it 6.5, and I'd say Virginia Tech most likely goes 6-6 or 7-5. But what are your thoughts? Give me your projections for the Hokies down in the comments below.